Well, now, hold on a second there, partner. Why don't you step into the saloon here for a little chit-chat? I've noticed we've got ourselves a little bit of a sour hootenanny on our hands here after my latest video on the iDubbbz situation. It's being hailed as a big L take from old Charles White here, and in the cyberspace, an L take is criminal, and the punishment for the crime is 1,000 different labels. So, there's a lot to talk about after the latest upload, so let's just go ahead and dive into it. I gave my opinion on the iDubbbz apology video, same thing every single person in the world with a keyboard has done over the last 24 hours, and this isn't shocking new content for me. I pretty much opine on everything everywhere that happens on the internet, even if it's like fucking 30-year-old drama from an extinct MMO that I found on a subreddit last week. If I find it either entertaining or if I have a lot to say about it, I'll usually make a video on it just because I kind of treat my channel like a diary, so I vomit out my thoughts. And not everyone's going to agree with them. And people shouldn't agree with everything that I say, because everyone should be their own individual. For a long time now, I've said how dangerous I feel echo chambers are, so I've never wanted my channel to become one of those. And I don't think it has. I know people will disagree, but there's been plenty of instances over the years where I've said things that people disagree with. I think disagreeing with someone is extremely healthy and important. I wouldn't want a community that doesn't think for themselves and just blindly agrees with everything I say without giving it any thought of their own. And in this case, people have disagreed with my perspective on the iDubbbz situation. For those that don't know, I'll quickly break it down. iDubbbz made an apology video yesterday where he talked about how deeply he regrets the content he used to make and how he views it as being just horrible, and that he's very sorry for all of the things that he put out there in the world and the pain that he caused through the content. And that's become a very divisive topic. And I gave my perspective on it. And since then, people have done some very uncharitable interpretations of what I've been saying, and I guess I can't really blame them. If I'm not abundantly clear with where I stand on things, I've learned that everything gets lost with ambiguity, and people run with the absolute most negative narrative they can find and the wildest ways to misconstrue some statements. So I actually can't even be mad about that. I recognize that's my own shortcoming, and this is something that's happened in the past, where when I make a video, I know my intention. I know what I believe and where I stand. But you guys don't. You're not like a little ghost or a spirit over my shoulder that's watching me make a video or in my little noodle up here when I'm delivering my thoughts. Which means it's my responsibility to make my intentions known and clear. And I don't always fully convey it effectively. So I definitely think that's played some role here in how everything's been playing out with people talking about me on Twitch and on Reddit and Twitter, but not fully. There's definitely going to be some people that are going to look like Eustace from Courage the Cowardly Dog when he gets that gel that he puts in his hair that makes him really mad and his eyes pop out of his skull and his head explodes, because there are just going to be some things that I believe that other people aren't. And that's okay. But what I don't appreciate and what really gets my ass twisted is people labeling me horrible things on a complete misunderstanding of what I actually believe. Or them just making up things that I believe, or putting their whole ass in my mouth and filling it with words that I've never said or even came close to trying to express. So let's get into it. By far the biggest thing I'm seeing from the online discussion around my video is people saying that I was attacking iDubbbz for trying to grow, and that I wanted him to stay in that 2016 edgy era. And my take was that of a 30-year-old man with a 15-year-old's brain who still giggles and loves edgy humor from yesteryear. When nothing could be further from the truth. A, I'm not 30. I'm 28 years old, and fucking shame on you, you disgusting swine, for insinuating that I'm pushing 30. I'm 28 years young. And B, it makes me feel like you didn't even bother watching the video, because I don't know how that could even come across at all. I'll quickly just play a small snippet from the end here, which I imagine a lot of people talking about this didn't even get to. So I really feel like throughout the video I made it clear that the edgy shit is lame and cringy. And that's something to absolutely regret. Now, obviously, times have changed, and he has changed. He's gotten older. He's in his 30s now. In your 30s, it's not exactly entertaining to just be spamming slurs for shock humor. I don't find that entertaining, and he doesn't either. So it's totally fine to want to distance yourself from making content like that. And that I was also supportive of him wanting to change and grow his content in a different direction. I still do respect that he didn't like what he was doing, so now he's doing something that he likes more. even though it is coming at the risk of losing his audience, he'll find happiness in the content that he makes going forward, and maybe he's happier with the new audience that he potentially cultivates through all of it. So I had a whole section in the video about how important I find it that content creators branch out. Instead of just living in a niche and staying locked down by their audience and their expectations, how they shouldn't just keep doing a song and dance that doesn't make them happy. They should be trying to grow and change as a person and as a content creator and changing their content. I had a whole fucking section about that, talking about it outside of even just the iDubbbz perspective here. So I don't really know how that one got so fucked up here with this whole discussion around my video. The point of my video was never to attack the idea that someone growing and regretting things they've done in their past is a bad thing. I really thought I made that clear, but I must have missed the mark since so many people are saying that the whole core component of my video is to attack the fact that he's apologizing for personal growth and doing things that make him happy, which I never meant to convey, and if that's what came across, then I'm sorry that I missed the mark so drastically. I really feel like multiple times I called out that it's completely normal and fine to regret the shit you said in those videos and want to distance yourself from that content in general. Like, that makes a lot of sense, and I talked about him making different content that makes him happier and how that's great. Like, you should never feel like a prisoner to your audience to keep delivering something that doesn't make you happy. That was one of the broader talking points I used in that video, but people are acting like I never said that and that I wanted him to stay doing the same shit from 2016, which of course I was never arguing for. Now, the next biggest thing by far is me saying that I don't think the apology was warranted. Warrant maybe wasn't the right word, since that's the one a lot of people are really like underlining and highlighting and giving me an F on the book report for. So to explain what I meant, when I'm saying I don't think the apology was warranted, I'm saying I don't think him being a product of edgy internet culture is necessarily something that should have been weighing on his mind so heavily for the last fucking 7 years, that he's lived with this constant guilt, this burden on his shoulders, where he's feeling as though he created edgy internet culture. The way he talked about in this video really made me feel very bad for him, that he's had this kind of looming disgust at the man he used to be because he partook in edgy internet culture, which wasn't just him. His channel wasn't the genesis of edginess. He didn't create it, he was molded by it, like fucking Bane from Batman. And I feel as though the content he used to make did have a message. He wasn't coming from a place of genuine hatefulness. I don't think he was ever like a real racist or an actual bigot. So when I said I don't think the apology's warranted, what I mean is, I don't think what he did was so damaging and scarring to the online space or individuals that for 7 years he's needed to carry this guilt where he felt obligated to finally apologize for it. If people really thought he held these racist, bigoted beliefs, I don't think many people would have been signing up for Creator Clash 1 and 2, right? Like, this is the first time he's publicly acknowledged it and fully apologized for it. He's, of course, talked about distancing himself from it on podcasts, but this is the first time he's really owned up to it publicly. But I think most people knew he wasn't, like, this evil, racist person. So what I was saying is, I just don't think what he did gave a ton of people the impression that he really was a horrible, racist, bigoted person. Now, I used the word obligated to apologize just a moment ago. And that's what I went into the video thinking the motivation was. Like, you know, after all this time, people pointing out, like, the use of slurs in those videos have made them age fucking horribly. You know, this isn't acceptable. You know, it's time you own up to your past sins. That's what I thought it was. But after listening to what people have said since I posted my video and diving a bit more into, like, the actual discussion in general online, I failed to really understand that maybe iDubbbz also treated this video like a diary where he just wanted to get everything off his chest with how he feels about it. So I completely misunderstood what the motivation could have been for this video, and for that, I'm sorry. The goal wasn't to attack the whole idea of an apology for content you regret. That was never my intention. So if this is truly like a very personal thing where he wants to just finally move on from this, and in order to do that, he wanted to make this video publicly addressing how he feels about all of it, then that's totally understandable. That's absolutely understandable. And I may have had like the wrong lens of viewing the video in the first place, since I may have got the wrong idea about what was even driving the video to begin with. But now I do want to explain, I still do believe that iDubbbz was never a bad person for the content cops he made. That edgy shock humor was very much a 2016 trend. That whole era with slurs being used willy-nilly for cheap shock humor was not uncommon on the internet. And I don't know why people think that I'm trying to harken back to the glory days of being able to use a bunch of slurs all over the place. I've never fucking said that. I think in the last video, what gave people that idea is I said 2016 era shock humor in all its glory. So they thought that I was trying to celebrate the golden days or something. But I've never ever spoken support for that kind of edgy shit. I've always openly made fun of that whole idea. Even back in the era, I always found it pretty lame for the most part. So that might have just been a misunderstanding of my sarcasm when saying in all its glory in the last video, but I want to make that clear. But anyway, him using these slurs for cheap shock humor in the content cops is embarrassing and something to genuinely regret and look back on like, damn, I fucked that up. Absolutely. And I said that in the last video too. They were videos that were meant to criticize people that did deserve criticism. One thing iDubbbz said in his video that I still very much disagree with is that he made videos criticizing people based on lackluster reasons. I very much vehemently disagree with that. The people he did make content on were worthy of being criticized and called out for bad actions and being highlighted for horrible things they've done. And in doing so, iDubbbz attempted to entertain his audience, and one of the ways he tried to entertain them was through this shock humor with his slurs. Like I said, his catchphrase being two slurs strung together is nothing to be proud of. So looking back on that component of content cops negatively and regretting that is a completely understandable and normal thing to do. Now, he did mention something that I also disagreed with initially, but after reading more, maybe I'm just too naive to really have a full grasp on it. I said that I don't think that content is indoctrinating, meaning I don't think him making those videos with the shock humor would lead to people thinking that all of a sudden it's okay to start using a ton of slurs, in the real world or around people or in general, right? I didn't think that, but I also failed to recognize that in 2016, I was still in my fucking 20s. Which is sad to think that I'm basically a fossil now. I wasn't a child during this period, so I don't know what effect this might have had on younger viewers of his. Maybe I'm very wrong in that it did serve as like a fucking gateway drug into racism or something. That is possible. I don't know. And that's what a lot of people did point out that I think is a great point. I was already old enough to recognize that he was never advocating for legitimate racism or bigotry or anything like that. That was never his message. But younger people may not have picked up on that. So I do believe it is possible that he did have a very negative effect on how a lot of the youth perceived slurs and maybe the willingness to use them. That is possible, and I'm sorry that I didn't consider that angle. I failed to realize that I was still pretty fucking old when the content cops were, hitting the cyberspace. So obviously, if you inadvertently became a lightning rod for real racists, that's fucking horrible. Now, I do still believe that his Content Cop series was not a cruel series. Like I said, the whole message behind it was pointing out some horrible things that people have done, and you delivered a message of here's why that shit's bad, and you coded your message with things meant to entertain, but in doing so, you delivered some bad shit along the way with the edgy shock slurs that were thrown in so loosey-goosey throughout the content. But I don't think that changes the actual message of what the video meant to convey. And it was never a message of cruelty. It was always a message of these people are doing bad, and these are people in very influential positions who probably shouldn't be. I don't think that is a bad message. I don't think there's anything cruel about what you were aiming to do. Another thing that always comes up in situations like this is them saying, you cut out important details on purpose, maliciously leaving out information that's crucial. And I always hate that. Like, I'm not just gonna play the entire video and go through each and everything. I just played the ones that I really wanted to focus on for the general point that I was trying to get across, which was A, growing and changing your content is always a good thing, and it makes complete sense why Ian iDubbbz would regret the edginess from those videos and would regret some of the big components of those videos. Like, I don't understand how all of that got so mixed up. Like, yes, I do disagree that the content was cruel, as I just explained, but the core message is still changing is a good thing, always has been, and I've always preached for that. Instead of just living in a niche forever and making yourself miserable doing the same thing forever, changing, growing as a person, and adapting is always great. And he had legitimate things to be regretful of. The edginess, the shock humor, inexcusably cringe, lame, not good. The remaining parts of his apology video were topics that I totally understood his perspective of. I totally got it. But none of them were what I was focusing on for what I was saying about the whole subject. For example, he mentions fan interaction where he met a couple fans and it helped him understand that, damn, my content is really giving people a certain vibe or a certain impression of me that just isn't true. So it helped like show him that there were a lot of things in the content that were regrettable, that he regretted. Like, I get that. Like, I totally understand it. And I didn't exclude them from my video as a way of like manipulating a narrative or trying to hide it or anything. They were just things I totally understood, but they weren't part of like the overall talking point that I was trying to discuss. In the last video, I mentioned that I didn't feel his content created the weirdo losers that disregard the message of the content and instead focused on just the slurs, right? Like a bunch of like actual bad actors who are just there to celebrate the fact that iDubbbz would say the bad words, the real off-limits stuff, the slurs. That's all they cared about. I said I have no doubt that those community members exist, but I didn't think his content created them. You know, I felt like, you know, like bacteria, they just happened to already be there and then found his content and then found a home there to keep celebrating that shit. But just like I mentioned a little while ago, I'm most likely wrong about this. I saw the content when I was in my 20s. I could see the satire in it. I assume the majority of other people could, but I didn't even take into consideration that a lot of the viewers were younger, and there's a very good chance that this content was their first exposure to it, and it may have led to them becoming those weirdo losers. Not necessarily that the weirdo losers had always existed since the beginning of time and then just found his content. There is a very high likelihood that it also just created that atmosphere with those kind of audience members as well, which is something iDubbbz would obviously want to distance himself from. I think that was most of the things people were talking about in relation to my video on the subject, so hopefully I cleared up any misconceptions about where I stand or what I believe. And I'm sorry if things got real lost somehow. I want to make it clear once again, I was never attacking iDubbbz for apologizing for regretting his content or for wanting to change and grow and do different things. I really thought I voiced support for those things, but I must not have done it effectively. So that's on me, and hopefully this gave all of my perspectives on it much more clarity. That's about it. See ya.